Hello? One? All right. Yeah, that was the intro. When is cloaking a good idea? Well, Google's not here anymore, so we can actually get going with this. And this stays here, right? It's not live streamed? Wait, it is? It's okay. Because this might have happened 5 years ago. No, there we go. All right, so yeah, cloaking. It can actually improve your SEO. And just like any other medical ad in the United States or New Zealand, as the other country that actually allows this, I have to caveat all this side effects that you might have when you cloak, especially if you're caught by Google doing any of these things. This is not officially sanctioned by Google in any ways, but just something that might have happened around 5 years ago for some B2B SaaS company that I may have been working at. Cool? All right. So yeah, we already had an intro. We can skip that. That's the mask thing. That's actually a kendo mengane. I do kendo, which is Japanese sword fighting. That's actually how I met my wife, but that's another story altogether. Yeah, that's the rough agenda that I'm not really following, but if you want to get a sense of that, that's what I'm going to talk about. And it all started a long, long time ago, about 5-ish years ago. There's this like crazy Slack channel that's really secretive, only for certain people. Inevitably, some guy or gal in support will find it, and we have to boot them out. But really what we were having an issue there was GDPR. And everyone is impacted by GDPR. Everyone has to put cookie consent on their websites. And back then, we're like, oh, that should be no issue, right? Like, we really measure impact by whether or not someone has signed up for HubSpot or if they asked for some sort of action. And what we learned was that was not consent. So if you signed up and became like a free customer or a free user, but you actually denied cookie consent, that would break our attribution. And guess what? I don't think this is actually going to get any better, and that's why I felt like this would be a great talk to talk about, right? So again, if you think about gating people from accessing content or doing anything like Quora does, like, hey, you want to read more, all that, and gating it, like, you don't get any of that data unless you accept that cookie. It's direct. So yeah, GDPR impacts everyone here because you don't know where a EU citizen may be searching for. So originally we were like, we'll just go to Search Console, we'll see like what the traffic is in all these countries, and then we'll get a rough estimate of the impact. Just don't do it. There's no point. Like, everyone's impacted, right? Like, you just don't know where these lawsuits and number of fines might come from. And originally the thought back then was like, well, are they really going to enforce it? How are they going to enforce it? Well, it's going up, and obligatory. I'm not a lawyer, but you know. So what did we discover when we started enabling cookie tracking and making sure that we actually don't track the people that denied consent? One of these countries rejected consent and stopped showing analytics. Is it Germany? France? Japan? United States? And the answer is Germany. Over half the visitors just want nothing to do with cookie consent. And so the German team was really scared because that's how we figure out everything in our business, via attribution. And so that conversion source was about to be not provided, right, for that whole team. And if you've been in SEO long enough, you know that phase is really scary. But of course, AI can solve all of humanity's problems, right? Conversion modeling from GA4. So what do? AI goes in, sees direct, and says, oh, some of that direct goes to these other buckets. Okay, do you believe that? What if their AI model improves? Does that data backtrack? Do you see the problem here? You don't control that, right? And so that was our main concern. You need to be able to know, what's generating money for your business. And heck, if they roll back something or do something, like, we don't control that. So this is what actually happened. We added a last touch attribution script in JavaScript that would append internal parameters in our links. So you know that golden advice in SEO saying don't ever hard code UTM parameters in your internal links? Well, oops, we created a new parameter and we're hard coding it in via JavaScript. What could go wrong? Well, I'm going to highlight two things. Number one, why do we have to do this? Well, because at where I work, everything goes down to the dollar money value. Everyone knows why the work we do is valuable. And so it all starts with understanding the searches people make, how those searches are tied to the products we sell, how many of those searches is it feasible for us to actually rank and get traffic from, how in an organic channel do they convert, and then in that conversion type, whether it's a lead, an offer they download, a demo they request for the sales rep, or a free account they create, of those people, then towards the end, how much money will they actually pay to us, right? And so you can throw some hypothetical numbers here. Maybe you did a bunch of keyword research, you got to about 100 million, and then you're like, oh, I can only capture 1% of that, and our conversion rates suck, so it's 1%. And maybe a person booking a demo actually becoming a paid customer is 10%. And if we sell something that's expensive, that's maybe like $1,000 a month, all of a sudden you're generating $1 million a month. And wow, if you are someone thinking about how do I get that promotion, how do I create a team for more headcount, really understanding your business and mapping this golden pyramid, triangle, however we want to invert it, doesn't matter, is really important. And again, why are we highlighting these two numbers in yellow? Those are the parts that I said we cared about, that last touch attribution, that we were not ceding control over to Google, that we went to very far depths to control and do last touch attribution. Great. All right, so what could go wrong? More crawl, better rankings, right? We just had that question. So we got about 212 million requests, maybe that happened. Maybe this was only one CCTLD, maybe. What could go wrong? Well, let's just say product was like, what the fuck is SEO doing? And then SEO was just like, we weren't actually in this meeting at all. This was decided by another team. And so fortunately, maybe back then we might have shared some infrastructure with our customers, and that's why it's like a critical situation that we remedy this. And so other things started cropping that was very stupid, interesting. So these parameters were showing up on other people's websites, not even related to us. So up here, I'll just read it out. Department of Labor, Google, Salesforce, Microsoft. Like I have no idea how these started showing up on other people's sites as duplicate content that is indexed on the web. But that happened. So short term, throwback. This might have happened a long time ago, right? So we had the parameter handling tool. That is, rest in peace, 2022. And we had about 300-ish that we said we might as well tackle that while we're here instead of the 7 that I just listed. And just to appease the product team, we're like, hey, let's crawl limits, Google bots, and make sure our customers are taken care of, because that's always our prime directive. Yeah. Good riddance, crawl parameter tool, it's like useless basically. It's not very effective. Again, we looked at our logs files and we're just like, hey, I thought I told Google just to ignore it because it doesn't really change the content at all. So what was the big fix? It was actually just to block Googlebot from executing the JavaScript that was appending parameters. And as a good SEO will do is when you have a crisis, don't waste it. You have resources to investigate other things that are weird and shouldn't happen. You might as well go ahead and tackle those too. So yeah, you're like, what's IP lookup? Well, that's something that we do in our CMS where we, based off of your IP address, might personalize the content on your page. We call that smart content. Does Googlebot care about that? Should it even try to load that? It doesn't need to. Oh, OK, let's just block it. Yeah. So we started actually from all those crawls to get up to 200 to 1 duplicates. And then over time, that got closer to 20 to 1. And it was a big win back then of things we were worried about. But again, there's a lot of room for improvement. Because once you start going down this rabbit hole of like, wait, I can block Googlebot and basically be cloaking. And when a person sees, all that long parameter to that, and then Google just sees one without a parameter, and we didn't get a manual penalty from this, right? Like, why stop here? So if you're doing dynamic rendering, right, you're like, OK, if users don't need schema, open graph data, and other metadata for bots, why are we loading it for them? Like, you could improve your web core vitals there, right? Or maybe like, bots don't execute non-rendering scripts. So if you have ad tracking, heat maps, tag manager, I'll leave A/B testing out of this for now, because that's still technically cloaking. They have a lot of really strict guidelines there, but I'm personally in the belief that they might as well make it simpler and just say, hey, we can just totally block Googlebot from any A/B testing platforms. But last but not least, another thing you can think about with this whole concept is if you're doing stuff on the edge, if you have parameterizations that that correctly canonicalize to a parameterless URL, why are we wasting all this time for Google to visit the URL, render the whole thing, and go like, yeah, we'll canonicalize to the parameterless one. Why don't we just, instead of a strong hint, strong arm Google and saying, that's a 301. Saves everyone some time, right? And that last one, I haven't done yet. Caveat, caveat, caveat. But if you've already done that, I'd love to hear from you. So yeah, this is the most boring slide that I have, right? So it's a good idea to cloak when what you're serving users is essentially the same as what search engines get in Spirit, right? They kind of give you a pass with that. And then you should only do this when you can actually get credit for this, right? Like whether it's cost savings with the producting, like most people don't really get assigned to that. Like Jory was just saying, like, oh, the bytes, it's like, it's a large number, it doesn't matter. I was like, well, if you can make it matter and claim credit for it, then it's a good thing for your career, right? So maybe reducing server costs, or maybe there's engineers you want to work with that are gold on that and you want to build that relationship. Those are things to look into. And if your workplace cares about sustainability, less wasted bytes on the wire just makes the world a better place, right? So last but not least, a little bit more controversial, when it's personalization, it's not really cloaking, and Google's good with that, right? So that's another angle to look at it with, if you have cookies or if you don't for personalization, and in some cases, location. And again, tons of caveats here. So should you even care about my presentation? Well, if this is your crawl stats report and you see like a trillion there, or I think that's a trillion? Yeah, OK. I don't know what comes after T. Is it a Q, an S, or G? But if that is what your crawl stats looks like, then I think you should really try to save some trees. Right? Like just have Googlebot not crawl your Google Tag Manager, and maybe you've already saved 1,000 trees. Just saying, right? And again, it's some pretty rough SEO math here. that I'm basing this off of, but whatever that byte differential it is, by going to the site of like, hey, they had to crawl this with all these scripts versus without, that's kind of the difference that you can then bring over to teams. And again, if your company mission statement has, offsetting CO2 emissions and all that, this is a perfect site. And again, hat tip here to Arnout Hellmans for sharing another deck he's worked on. And again, he deeply cares about performance and the impact on sustainability. Another one here on the note of personalization, why resize images like in your personal devices and then have that load really slowly when you could just do that on the edge, right? And Jono here has his own GitHub repo of this where you can really, if you're on both WordPress and have Cloudflare paid account, that you can serve the exact image dimensions for the user versus having the user load the images and then have to resize it. So this will help your core web vitals. It'll save the environment a little bit. And again, this is personalization. It's not really cloaking. So there's a lot of smart things we can do when we really think about like what we serve people versus what we serve search engines, and do we really need to serve all this junk to search engines? So yeah, cloaking right now, as it's defined in Search Console, is the practice of presenting different content to users in search engines with the intent to manipulate search rankings and mislead users. So again, the good definition is we're not misleading users. And if your technology, or if site uses technologies and search engines have difficulty accessing, JavaScript or images, they have recommendations, right, on what to use. I doctored this slightly. There's some examples in between. But what I would propose, like, maybe, we can say there's cloaking. It's still different content for users and search engines. But when we're doing this to save resources, right, without misleading users, it's a great idea. We're on YouTube, right? So I can't swear. We can't monetize this. Swear. Do it. Yeah, it's a fucking great idea, guys. And I'm kind of just being kind of subtle about this because I don't want to wake up the next day and I have like a manual penalty and waiting in my inbox. But again, if your site is using technologies that's difficult for search engines, like JavaScript generating parameters, or like you have tracking pixels from ads that Google really shouldn't care, like, then follow some recommendations for reducing any kind of unnecessary data transfers by cloaking. Like that should just be a good thing for everyone, hopefully, right? So again, thank you.